And we are off to begin the lesson 1.08, the Middle and Southern Colonies. As Puritans and other English colonists settled in New England, others were making new homes further south. Around the Chesapeake Bay, colonists in Virginia continued to struggle, leading King James I to dissolve the Virginia Company and turn the colony into a royal colony, the first in North America. The next King of England, Charles I, helped Catholics gain a foothold in America by awarding a huge land grant that would become Maryland. And even further south, in Carolina, wealthy gentlemen planters began to bring indentured servants and slaves to their new colony. Goals for today's lesson: identify the middle and southern colonies and their founders, describe major events in Virginia's development, and recognize distinguishing characteristics of the New England, middle, and southern colonial regions. Our lesson resources available for today's lesson is a sheet called Comparing the New England, Middle, and Southern Colonies, and the lesson answer key and reading guide that go along with that. But we'll come back to that a little bit later. Let's go on to the next page. First thing it says on our daily checklist: complete the online review of the New England colonies. Quick check New England colonies. So we're going to do a review before we begin. So here's a little activity. What settled in large numbers in New England in order to avoid persecution and worship without oppression? I think it's the Puritans. The civil body politic created by the Mayflower Compact was the beginning of what in America? Self-government, perhaps? Puritan communities were very tolerant of other people and people of other faiths. Were the Puritans? No, they were not, remember? That's why some of them left to form Rhode Island as a place of religious freedom and tolerance. What was founded by Roger Williams, a dissenter who felt the church and state should be kept separate? I just said that, Rhode Island. The Puritans' habit of changing alliances among the what was one cause of King Philip's War, Native Americans, and the Massachusetts Bay Colony was founded by what as a place where Puritans could escape poor economic conditions in England and worship without oppression? And that would be John Winthrop. Let's check our answers. And they're all correct. Good job, Mrs. Carr. Okay, so that's a quick review of what we learned thus far. So now let's go back and let's read pages 59 through 71. So that means I need to get to the textbook. So a moment here. Okay, so here we are on page 59. And we'll skim through some areas and read others in full. Catholic gentry to Maryland. During the reign of Charles I, Puritans were not the only religious group to seek refuge in North America. English Catholics were also on the defensive. While King Charles was grateful to England's Catholic gentry for supporting his marriage to Henrietta Maria, he had to ease the minds of high-ranking members of the Church of England who worried about the Catholic leanings. Charles was pressured to force harsh laws against Catholics. At the same time, Charles tried to help Catholics by giving North American land grants to Catholic landowners. Unlike the commercial venture of the Virginia Company or the New England Company, these grants set up proprietary colonies. A colony in which the proprietor or owner, either a single person or a small group, owned the land exercises power over the government. The Catholic proprietors were landowning royalty and high-ranking gentry. In America, they could live as they had in England, but now they had sweeping authority to appoint officials, make laws, and divide the land into sub-grants. And they could be free of any pressure to join the Church of England. Charles gave the largest grant of 12 million acres to Cecilius Calvert, the son of the recently deceased Sir George Calvert. Sir George, also called Lord Baltimore, had served King Charles' father, James I, in a high government position. The new colony, located in the Chesapeake Bay area north of Jamestown, would be called Maryland after Charles's wife, Henrietta Maria. Cecilius Calvert inherited from his father not only the title of Lord Baltimore, look at that, Lord Baltimore, Baltimore, Maryland, but also the dream of making Maryland a sanctuary for Catholics. The new Lord Baltimore knew the colony could not be for Catholics alone. He needed more colonists and laborers to help the colony succeed. Okay, unlike Massachusetts Bay with cold winters and rocky ground, Maryland enjoyed mild temperatures, warm breezes, and fertile soil. In short order, Protestant craftsmen built the capital city of St. Mary's City, followed by grand manor houses for Catholic gentry. Lord Baltimore tried to attract more colonists by making land easy to acquire and by allowing property owners to elect an assembly to make laws. But as the Protestant population grew, so did religious friction. When Puritans arrived in Maryland, an armed conflict followed since the Puritans refused to tolerate Catholics. To maintain peace as more Protestants settled in Maryland, the governor requested that legislature passed a new law called an Act Concerning Religion, widely known as the Act of Toleration. It said that all Christians in Maryland could freely practice their faith. No Christian could be troubled or compelled to exercise a religion against their consent. Maryland's law was not as broad as Rhode Island's. It did not allow Jews or people of other non-Christian faiths to practice their religions. But in this North American colony, far from the mother country and facing new challenges, a new policy of religious freedom began to emerge. With an official policy of religious tolerance in place, Maryland's population grew. Wages for laborers rose with the success of the tobacco crops of the Catholic landholders. Maryland's gentry only had to look south to raise their hopes for tobacco as the quickest route to wealth. It already brought prosperity to Jamestown and Virginia. Now shoring up Virginia. John Rolfe, who played a key role in making tobacco in Virginia's major cash crop, wrote that the greatest want of all is good and sufficient men, and he might have added women. And they began to take more steps to bring in women as wives for the settlers. In the same year, the company also imported more laborers, both indentured servants and the colony's first African slave. The company sent planters, boys and girls, and even criminals to make up the tobacco planting workforce. Many settlers wanted to run their own affairs rather than take order from the Virginia Company in London. In 1619, the colonists were allowed to elect representatives called burgesses to make laws for the colony. Virginia's House of Burgesses was the first representative assembly in the colonies. Self-government. This will be a theme that will be showing up as we inch closer and closer to the American Revolution. In Virginia's long, hot growing season, tobacco thrived, but that same weather was deadly for people. Going up again about disease-carrying mosquitoes killed many. The steady arrival of more Englishmen worried the Indians and infuriated a Powhatan leader. He led an uprising in 1622 attacking colonists who lived on isolated farms up the James River. When the massacre was over, some 350 colonists were dead. The Jamestown death rate from disease and Indian hostilities alarmed King James I. In 1624, he dissolved the Virginia Company and took over the colony's affairs, making it the first royal colony in North America. But at the same time, James had to deal with Puritan dissenters in England. He was too preoccupied to notice that the House of Burgesses continued to govern the colony without much attention to the king or goings-on in England, developing more of an independent atmosphere. The English Civil War, Cavaliers to Virginia. King Charles I, who inherited the throne from James I, set himself against England's Parliament, which was filled with Puritan critics. Charles tried to arrest 5 members of the House of Commons. When thousands of soldiers rushed to defend Parliament, the king fled London. England was plunged into civil war. The king's royalist supporters were called Cavaliers because many were excellent horsemen. Cavaliers waged their war against Puritan Roundheads, so called because of their close-cropped haircuts. Oliver Cromwell, a Puritan member of Parliament, led the Roundheads to victory. He assumed leadership of England in 1648. The following year, a Puritan court tried and convicted Charles, declaring him a tyrant, traitor, murderer, and public enemy. And then he was beheaded. Puritans established a Commonwealth, a republic with Cromwell in charge. When the news reached Massachusetts, Puritans were delighted. During the English Civil War and Cromwell's subsequent 11-year rule, the great migration of Puritans to New England ended. Instead, many Cavaliers, supportive of the executed king, fled to Virginia. Unlike Puritan colonists, these new arrivals were aristocrats and landowners. They were driven by no religious motivation. Instead, they hoped to recreate the aristocracy of Old England on plantations in Virginia. For a while, little stopped them. In later years, the planters of both Virginia and Maryland turned increasingly from indentured servants to African slaves to work their tobacco plantations. As we will see, that decision had enormous consequences. Bacon's Rebellion. In Virginia, the Cavalier landholders at first relied for labor mainly on the thousands of indentured servants who had migrated with them. Indentured servants worked after these indentured servants worked long enough to gain their freedom, they found little good land left for them. As freemen, they had to move inland and settle for land away from the water, which made it difficult for them to transport the crops to the market at Jamestown. Okay, so let's back up a minute and let's clearly define what it means to be an indentured servant. An indentured servant is somebody who lived in England who wanted to move to the North America colony, to whether it's Massachusetts Bay or to wherever it was, but they didn't have enough money, so they would hire themselves out as indentured servants. And what that means is that they would work for somebody for a period of years. I think it was around 7 years, and after that time, then their debt to them would be over, and then they could be free to get land on their own and live their own lives. So it was similar to slavery, but these were white men and women, and they would only be indentured for a certain amount of time. Often their conditions were very poor, living conditions and how they were treated, but still not as horrible as it was for an African American slave that was kidnapped off their lands and sold into slavery into the New World. So that's a little bit about indentured servants. And as we go along, as we learn more about indentured servants and the growth of slavery, we will find that many people that were using indentured servants decided that it was not as profitable, because then after a period of years they'd be gone and they have to start all over again. So that's why more of them turned to slaves, because they were permanent unless they would sell them on their own. But they would of course sell them for a profit instead of an indentured servant, which they, after that time was up, they were just free to go. So as we see that there was more of a demand for labor, people in the South especially be turning more and more to African American slavery. Continuing on. In 1676, a wealthy young planter, Nathaniel Bacon, promised to lower taxes and give more and better land to any freemen, white or black, who helped him attack the Indians. He also promised immediate freedom to indentured servants who would join him. Bacon and his forces proceeded to attack both hostile and friendly Indians. Then they marched east to the capital of Jamestown. They set it aflame and drove Governor Berkeley and his supporters across the Chesapeake Bay to the Delmarva Peninsula. Bacon's rebellion alarmed England's king, who sent a fleet of ships and 1,000 soldiers to restore order. No longer was the king content to let the colonies handle their own affairs. By this time, the trade in tobacco and other goods had made the colonies too valuable to ignore. Nathaniel Bacon remained in control for a month. When he died suddenly, the rebellion ended with him. Furious at the uprising, he ordered the execution of many of the rebels, but the king disapproved of Berkeley's brutal actions and recalled the governor to England. The Virginians managed to reconcile their differences. Members of the House of Burgesses heeded the lessons from Bacon's rebellion. They learned that frontiersmen and small landholders could not be ignored. They lowered taxes and developed friendlier relations with small planters. In 1677, they also negotiated a new treaty with the Indians, which opened more land to colonial settlement. Okay, and here's just an artist rendition of Bacon's rebellion. Okay, we're going to stop here for this part 1 of this lesson and continue on the next video with part 2 of this same lesson.